Ladies and gentlemen, our next event of the evening is a one-fall match with a 60-minute time limit.
I don't know the name of the song, but everybody knows the beat when they see it with NWA stuff. Yeah, dun 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 dun.
What I'd like to have right now,
where the big boys play.
this is where the big boys play, huh?
This is where the big boys play.
Well, hello everyone. You're listening to Where the Big Boys Play. I'm here with Brian and Chad for Starrcade 86. Say hello, fellas.
Hello,
How's it going,
fellas.
everybody?
Now, Brian, say a few words for us. Towards the end of last week's show, you were a little bit croaky. What's happened to you in the past week?
Well, I basically had hell on earth happen to me, and got pretty sick over the last week, and I'm finally getting out of the hole now, but still not 100% back yet. My whole family here has been sick, my wife and kid too, so it's been like not a mental ward. It's been like a sick ward in here.
Yeah, but you've got this husky voice now. Maybe some of our female listeners, may find this a little bit sexy.
Maybe. Good luck.
As if we've got female listeners.
Yeah, really.
So, Starrcade 86, still happening in November. Starrcade is still a Thanksgiving show, and just like last year, it's coming from Atlanta and from the Omni. From the Omni in Atlanta and from the Greensboro Coliseum. The only change they've got this year is that they've got two different announced teams. Before we get into that, a little bit of a word on Magnum TA, because we're not going to see him anymore in the ring, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's a shame too, because this is the show of all shows that really gets completely turned around if you kind of look at what was going on as they led into it. But so on October 15th, he was in a bad car accident. He wasn't speeding or anything. He was just driving home and on his way from a bar actually in Charlotte, North Carolina. His slick spot in the road and just drilled his car into a tree, I believe, and rolled it over, and was pretty badly injured. I think they initially put him on life support. They got him out. Obviously, he recovered mostly, but if you've ever seen him ever since, I think his right arm's been pretty useless ever since then. So he was never going to get back in the ring again. I know when it initially happened on television, they were talking about how 2 weeks afterward they were on TV saying, "Oh, Magnum's getting better quickly," and I don't know if they were doing that to keep people thinking, "Oh, maybe there's a chance," or if his recovery was getting better and then eventually just stopped to a point they were like, "Oh, this isn't going to work."
Obviously, it's a great personal shame for him, but also business-wise for Crockett. That's got to be a big blow. It's like losing. They were clearly building Magnum as the ace of this company, and just as he would have definitely got a world title push in '87, right?
Oh, you figure he definitely would. I know a lot of people. The rumor's been that this was the night that he was going to fight Flair for the title, but as we take a look at this today and through some of the television, it didn't look that way that he was going to fight Flair here, but you could definitely tell they were positioning him to become the man in 1987. Yeah.
Yeah, and Chad, just a couple of words on Magnum as a worker, because we've kind of seen all of what we're going to see from him. And any thoughts on where his kind of value lies?
I think again it's sort of unfortunate that with Magnum, with the car accident, I think we was really starting to see him, really coming to his own as a worker and as an overall performer with the Tully feud and then with the Nikita feud. So I could honestly see him, if he kept advancing and got a successful world title run, being one of the best, kind of super heavyweight baby faces, remembered very fondly, because he was getting a lot better on the microphone and in the ring. I would say he was definitely a good worker for 85 and 86.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. And here's a kind of hypothetical what if. Do you think that if he'd have had this run in '87 that he would have? Nobody really ever thinks about this, but do you think he would have eventually ended up north? Would he have gone to WF?
I think almost definitely. I mean, at that point, again, I'm thinking of this from the way things really went in '87. I mean, if he gets up there in '87 and Crockett land and takes over, does Jim Crockett even end up having to sell his company? You know, it's one of those things. But on the same token, it could also be, you know, he gets the title and it goes to his head. He puts on shitty matches and he's not remembered. I kind of look at a lot of these, and I don't know if you guys agree or not, but the Jim Morrison or the Kurt Cobain thing, they didn't. We don't know how far they could have gone, so we kind of glamorize it as how far it could have been.
Yeah.
When in reality, a lot of times it could have been not good at all.
Yeah, I can understand now. And also, the other thing to remember, and sorry to trivialize this, but at some point that moustache would have gone out of fashion, and you know, his gimmick, the Magnum TA gimmick was basically based on Magnum PI, right?
Definitely, 100%.
So he would have had to have some sort of gimmick change at some point.
Well, I don't think Tom Selleck's ever really shaved his mustache. Maybe a couple times, but it's always coming back. So maybe not.
Well, I know Scott Hall had one of those big mustaches at this point as well.
Oh, yes, he did.
All right, let's get into Starrcade '86 then. Our first match is, and we should explain, there's a few different versions of this show out there. We're doing the big 3-hour version, but yeah, there's a few different versions, right, Brian?
Yeah, there's the original Turner release, which is like a 90-minute clipped version. It's in the black case that I know a lot of times, if you remember watching television back then, that Ric Flair would do the commercial. They talk about the matches, but it was clipped up and the matches are all out of order. They put another version out that added one more match, which was the strap match we'll get to here. There's this version, which is actually the 3-hour New Zealand version. Came from there and has pretty much the entire show on it. I think there's one match clipped on this version that's not clipped on the other one. I don't know why they did all that. And then there's of course the big 4-hour Best of Starrcade '83 to '87 that actually has 2 of the matches on here and their entirety on that match as well. So you'd have to work to get the whole show complete, but it's out there.
Couldn't help but notice that there's no interviews on this show. Did any of those other versions have interviews on them? Do you know?
No, I didn't see any of them do it either. And like I said, this is the most complete version. I've always wondered. I've never seen the closed circuit version to wonder if they were really there or not.
Strange that there's no interviews on the show, because the other Starrcade so far, you know, had quite a lot of, you know, we saw in Starrcade '83 when they kept on going back to the locker rooms of Race and Flair and whatnot, where we were saying that, like, you know, good portion of the show was promos, but here we got none. So
it's strange too that WWE, you know, online or 24/7 or Classics on Demand hasn't put this out yet, because '85, '87, and '88 have all been and '84 have actually '83 too have all been shown in their entirety on there, and they kind of skipped this one. I'm not sure why.
So we start out in, I think it's Atlanta to start off with. We're in the Omni, and it's double duty for Tony Schiavone tonight, because he's the ring announcer and the play-by-play guy. What do we think of Tony Schiavone as a ring announcer? He's serviceable?
Serviceable. That's as far as I would go.
Yeah, don't give up the day job, Tony. I mean, he was all right. And for some reason, he's not with David Crockett, who for some reason can't get a break on Starrcade. Still no David Crockett. He's actually with a chap called Rick Stewart. And I had to look up this guy because I didn't know who he was. But apparently he was the announcer for Central States Wrestling.
Yeah. Yes. He if you've ever heard any of the shoot interviews with one of the territorial bookers walks around named Buck Robley.
Yeah.
He just loved Rick Stewart, thought he was going to be the next big thing, but he also would end up dying really young. So.
Yeah. Well, JCP bought out this Central States territory, and kind of Stewart came with a package. But I found a couple of stories that he died in 1989 of AIDS, and was actually one of the few kind of openly gay men in wrestling, which is interesting. I don't know if he was openly gay, but he was definitely gay. So there's not too many, really, are there? There's not too many kind of gay men, especially at this time.
Oh no! I mean, you might have had the the Adrian Street gimmick going around, but that's the only one I can really think of that had any effeminate qualities to it at this time, especially in '86.
So Jimmy Garvin comes out to Sharp Dressed Man, and he's with Precious, and he does a lot of strutting and dancing, which immediately set me against him because obviously heels don't dance. And Brad Armstrong is just standing there in a tracksuit top, kind of looking a bit like Bob Backlund in '93. No gimmick at all. So quite contrast between these two guys. Any story going into this one?
There's no really story going into this. It's just like, hey, we're going to throw these two in here. Brad Armstrong had just shown up in Crockett Land a couple of weeks, if not a month before this. And Jimmy Garvin actually was feuding with Magnum TA through October when Magnum got in his accident. So I don't think they were leading to Jimmy Garvin and Magnum here. I think it was just kind of a side feud. So Garvin might have been pegged for this the whole time. But like I said, there's no running storyline between these two at all.
Now, this is our first look at Garvin as well, isn't it? I don't think we've seen him before. Chad, have we seen Jimmy Garvin before this time?
No, this is our first look on these Crockett shows.
Yeah, he noticeably to me seemed like somebody who would be better suited to being in WWF at this time. He's definitely of a different style to a lot of the other guys on the card. More of a showman.
Yeah, he's definitely more of a showmanship type heel, but I don't know. I've kind of always liked Jimmy Garvin. I think I've been higher on him than most.
I have too. I've always appreciated his work. I think it's different, it's good, and I like the gimmick he did.
I think you'd like his world class stuff a lot, Parv, in the kind of '84, '85 era. If you watched it, he had a real good run in world class then.
And then also the AWA. I know you guys are still watching the
yeah.
There's a lot of him on there, and there's other stuff that hasn't made that set that he was pretty good up there too.
Okay.
Yeah, he weirdly reminds me of someone like Lanny Poffo, maybe in a strange way. Where did he come from originally, Jimmy? Like, where did he start out? Did he start out in Texas or?
He actually started in Florida.
Oh, right, okay.
Wrestling down there just as like a white meat babyface doing his thing, and I believe he went to Texas world class, and that was I believe early '83 is when gorgeous Jimmy Garvin was born.
So we get mat work to start, and there's a lot of kind of headlocks and counter wrestling, wrist locks, reversals, arm bars, and counter arm bars in the early going here. Rick Stewart mentions that the referee here is Scrappy McGowan, who we see quite a lot. Where's this dude come from? Scrappy McGowan wasn't on any of the previous shows that we've seen. Was he a Central States ref, I wonder?
I have no idea where Scrappy came from.
Garvin applies a head scissors for what seems like an hour to me, and eventually Armstrong does a neat little headstand to get out of it, only for Garvin to reapply it. Armstrong counters with a headlock. Shivani mentions that 10 minutes have gone. We get a back suplex from Garvin. Brad takes a tumble to the outside and stays there for what feels like a very long time for me. Then he gets back in. We get a backbreaker from Garvin, which gets 2. There are some near falls, and then there's a weird draw as Garvin comes from the top rope and misses anyway. Now, I've got a feeling I'm going to be in the minority here, but I pretty much hated this match. I reckon you two will have liked it, or at least liked it better than I did. So, Chad, I'll leave it to you.
I kind of agree with you. I do like Jimmy. I actually thought I'd be the lowest one on this match, so I'm kind of happy. I thought we might have some contention. I do like Garvin, but I thought this match was... I can see how some people would enjoy this match as kind of a easing into the card, opening match type. But to me, there was a lot of kind of decent hold working, but it didn't really lead to anywhere or any consequence. And I always kind of hate that, where you just sort of have people just kind of working on holds and doing a few reversals and whatnot, and the draw I thought was pretty confusing. One thing, just touching on Jimmy Garvin, I always thought it was strange that he was, they said he was brothers to Ron Garvin, which I thought they looked, nothing alike. But then I was just looking it up on, I was looking Jimmy Garvin up on Wikipedia, and Brian, I guess you probably knew this, but I never knew this. Ron Garvin was actually Jimmy Garvin's stepfather.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, that's basically it. He was his stepfather. I don't know if they were acknowledging they were brothers yet on television. I don't think they acknowledged that until another 4 or 5 months from now, I think, whenever Jimmy Garvin turns face. I think then there's a big hoo-ha that happens. We'll get to that. Where Garvin comes on and says, "That's my brother," everything else. I don't think they're mentioning it right here. Now, I know in Canada, I'm actually trying to find this right now, Jimmy and Ronnie Garvin were fighting in Montreal against the Rougeau brothers, acting as brothers.
Yeah, and it seems bizarre that that was, Ron was Jimmy's stepfather when they're only 8 years apart. That's awesome.
That's awesome.
But anyway, this match, yeah, I thought this was pretty much nothing.
It's just 15 minutes of rest holds, right?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of side headlocks and stuff like that. I'm not too huge on Brad Armstrong, to be honest, overall either. I think he's fine, but and I kind of have to fight back some personal feelings with that, because I know my dad, Bob Armstrong's his favorite wrestler. Bob Armstrong and Mr. Wrestling 2. My dad grew up in Marietta, where Bob Armstrong was a fireman in Marietta, and so one of his, even though he wasn't a huge wrestling fan growing up, he always talks about driving by the firehouse and seeing Bob Armstrong lifting weights and whatnot. So he sort of default really liked Brad when I was watching, as a kid, but I mean, I don't think he's terrible, but nothing great either.
Am I right in thinking that Brad Armstrong is kind of hyped by some people as being, possibly one of the all-time great workers who just didn't have much charisma?
I think I would say there was a lot of hype around him more kind of 5 or 6 years ago, when you first started having people sort of look back, at the territorial days and eras, and kind of could start looking back at that nostalgically and really analyze what was going on there. Now I think you're starting to see it kind of go the other way. I know a few years ago there was a lot of play around Brad Armstrong, and I watched a lot of his matches. And again, I mean, I wouldn't call him, again, it's kind of tough. I mean, I would call him a good worker, but I certainly don't think like he was just, a mouthpiece or something away from being a world champion, in my opinion.
Yeah, I kind of see it the other way. I think if he could talk a little better and they put a little something behind him, he could have done something. World champion, maybe not, but I could see him getting a TV title run, or maybe even a U.S. title run. As he was great in the ring, I thought, very sound, very technical, and there's a match that he has with Tully in early '87 when Tully's defending the TV title on television a lot. That's probably one of my favorite like WCW TV show matches of all time.
I mean, he definitely has some people that really enjoy it. I mean, I think it'd been interesting if, for instance, he'd had the interview skills of Road Dogg, his brother.
Yes.
With his wrestling ability, I mean, I would have liked to have seen how that would have worked out, but yeah, I can certainly understand how people would like Brad Armstrong a good bit. I guess I'm lower on him than most, I would say.
Just out of interest, before we move on, Brian, did you actually like this match?
Yeah, I did. I think it was about 5 minutes away and a real finish from being really good. But with what happened on here, it was okay. Average.
Okay. All right. Well, just for me, I mean, this may be a kind of stylistic or taste thing, but like, if there are no strikes or decent kind of high spots in a match, and it's just rest holds, or just submission, submission maneuvers and counter wrestling, I feel like nothing has happened in the match, basically. So
I don't know why I enjoy those kind of things. They just kind of work over each other, try to tell a small story, and I don't know why I enjoy that stuff, but for some strange reason I do.
The only thing I'll give this match is that despite the fact that most of it was kind of map-based, they did work at quite a decent pace, weirdly. That's what I'd give it. Anyway, let's move on. So we're over to Greensboro now. Tom Miller is obviously the ring announcer. He's looking pretty old at this point, starting to look like a pensioner at this stage. And our announcers are Bob Caudle and not David Crockett yet again, but Johnny Weaver. Now, I can't help but wonder, where is David Crockett? There must be a reason why he doesn't do these Starrcade shows, because they had 2 announced teams here, and he didn't get on either of them, which is pretty upsetting for me, given what Weaver would end up bringing to this show.
Maybe he's at home with the family enjoying some turkey.
So we've got it's a tag match, and we've got Baron von Raschke as a face, Hector Guerrero in a big Mexican hat, versus Shaska Whatley and Brian's favorite, the Barbarian.
Drilling away Meaninglessville again. Terrible.
So what's the story here? Why is Brian von Raschke a face? He was a heel last time we saw him.
A couple small things that happened leading up to this. I think they did a good job of throwing this match together. Von Raschke had been having some small issues with Paul Jones in interviews, and the typical lead up. You can see turns coming, but finally on the October 18th World Championship Wrestling, Baron actually lost a fall in a 6-man when he was tagging with Rude and Shaska Whatley against Brad Armstrong and the Kansas Jayhawks. Following that match, Jones Army attacked him and turned on the Baron, defaultly turning him face right after that. From there, so now we have Von Raschke on the face side. The Hector Guerrero thing, teaming up with him, comes from Hector and Manny Fernandez, who we'll talk about later, who also turned heel on poor Jimmy Valiant. Had been tagging quite a bit through the summer of '86, having a couple of world tag title shots with the Midnight Express, a couple of other good matches, and Hector Guerrero would come out to try to talk to Manny Fernandez when he was having an interview with Manny and Rude, and they ended up beating Hector down. So Hector and Baron von Raschke team up now to go against some of Paul Jones' Army and Shaska Whatley and the Barbarian.
So was Hector actually on quite a decent run here with Crockett, or was he just passing through? Because he's another one of those guys who moves around quite a lot.
I haven't seen him. He doesn't do a lot television-wise, but like I said, him and Manny got a really nice house show push of really a bunch of world tag title shots over the summer and early fall.
He seems pretty over as well. And Baron von Raschke, I have to say, was very over with this crowd, which surprised me a little bit. But I guess von Raschke had been around for years, right? So maybe the fans were used to seeing him. Shaska seems to have learned at the start of this match, because he's not dancing anymore. He just has a serious look on his face, which kept me happy, because obviously heels don't dance. Shaska and Hector start things off here, and Barbarian gets a tag, and he shotguns Hector after catching him, which is a quite neat little spot. Barb takes a tumble to the outside. Hector crossbodies him by diving over the top rope, and Caudle sort of marks out of this and says he's never seen this before, which surprises me, given how long Caudle was working at this point.
May get to see now. Oh, the Baron's on the outside. I don't think I've ever seen that before. Now, clean over to the top rope. Hector Guerrero crossbody right on the Barbarian outside, but Whatley is changing the tide of battle.
Weaver leaves the booth to do an interview with Dusty that we never see. So there's more double duty going on. So we have a situation here. Weaver's doing double duty, Tony Schiavone's doing double duty, and David Crockett is still not here. So
turkey time.
He's just sitting there with his brother eating turkey. There's a loud Von Raschke chant, and then I couldn't help but notice there's an old bearded ref. Do you know who this guy is? Any ideas, Brian?
No, I actually had no idea who he was. I'm not real good with who the referees are outside of the big guns.
Yeah, so this was quite a long show, so we were getting to see some of the lower card refs, like this bearded guy and Scrappy McGowan. Hector's our face in peril here. The heels work him over. Eventually, Hector spits at Shaska for the hot tag, which was an odd bit of business, because I think just before that, Shaska had spat at him when he was on the floor, so that was a little bit distasteful. Von Raschke gets a claw on Whatley. Barbarian counters, but Baron gets the 3 anyway after an elbow, and the crowd go wild. Post-match, the heels sucker the Baron, and I still think that Von Raschke looks awful. He just looks old, and I'm not buying that. This guy is going toe-to-toe with a guy like the Barbarian, and I also don't understand why the heels had to lose here. Chad, any thoughts?
Yeah, I didn't think this was a nothing match. I would have liked to have seen the Barbarian, quite frankly, get a pinfall victory on this. Just a couple little things on Baron von Raschke. Again, I've never seen him in a good match. I know in the AWA set, he, shows up some there, so I'm hopeful that I will see a decent Baron performance there. And Hector Guerrero, again, I think is sort of in the same Brad Armstrong mode. I feel like this show has a lot of wrestlers that I'm kind of go the other way on than sort of opinion is. I've never been a big Hector fan or honestly Chavo fan, his brother. I know a lot of people like Chavo Sr. Quite a bit actually, and the Mid-South stuff I've seen with Chavo and Hector I've liked, but the Japan footage and what limited other territorial footage I've seen, I've not been too enthused by it. And I think it's ridiculous that Cottle, on the crossbody said he'd never seen a move like that again. I mean, yes, that was a nice move for 1986, but give me a break, It's not like that would have been a crazy move at that point in time, I wouldn't think. Like an unbelievable once-in-a-lifetime.
Chavo has one really good match with Mr. Olympia on that Mid-South set. That was kind of like, I haven't actually finished watching that, but it was like in my top 2 or 3. That Chavo versus Mr. Olympia. That was really good. And he had a couple of good tag appearances on that set, but the stuff from All Japan pretty much sucked from those guys. From both Hector and Chavo.
I did not like the All Japan stuff at all. I mean, on the All Japan stuff, a lot of people, in the comments seemed to like it okay, where it was sort of mid-range for them. Most of that was in my bottom, 20 matches or so. So, and then his New Japan stuff that I've seen is kind of the same way. I've not been impressed with it either. So, but this match though was nothing and really felt like filler, and honestly I kind of wish they'd have scrapped this whole match and gave some time to a couple other matches.
I can't understand why they won't put the Barbarian over. Any thoughts, Brian?
They hate me, maybe. I think what they were trying to do here is like this version of Paul Jones' Army, and maybe they were trying to start thinning it out. Because as we get into the next year, I know Paul Jones starts to really focus on a couple of tag teams, and you don't see as much of these guys, in that large grouping that comes on television all the time. So I don't know if their goal here was, okay, let's try to thin the herd here a little bit and go from there. And why Baron von Raschke gets a pin here, I don't understand. I mean, up in AWA land, I get it. He's a friend of Vern's. He's from there. That's fine. Down here, I don't know.
But you're pushing a guy who really needs to retire.
Yeah, he looks like my grandfather wrestling. I'm sure he's a very nice guy. I've seen some good interviews with him. Nice guy, but it's over. He'd keep going until the early '90s.
Is he ever any good? Because like Chad, I've never seen Baron von Raschke in a good match.
Now, you know what? I haven't either. I haven't seen a lot of his early stuff. So I really can't comment too much on back in the day. But everything I've ever seen, not real good. No, nothing that's made me say, "Wow, I got to see more of him."
So, yeah, not a good start to this card in either town, in my view. Our third match is the Kansas Jayhawks which is Dutch Mantell and Bobby Jaggers. So obviously some Memphis guys here, versus the Russians, the Ivan and Crusher Khrushchev version, who are the US Tag Champs. One of my least favorite set of titles.
Oh, really? I love the U.S. tag titles.
I've been back and forth with lots of guys on this. I just for me, I just don't think there are enough tag teams to justify having a second tier. Even at this time, when you have all of these awesome teams, I just think the Russians should be in the world title mix. They shouldn't be messing around with these US tag belts. Yeah, I can just never for me it's such a that's not a big deal, surely, winning the US tag championships. You might as well not have a belt. Or do you disagree, Brian?
I love the titles. I think it's a great idea to kind of, usually the world tag team titles, it's something that tends to get on somebody, especially in this era, and they'll stay there for months and months and months. And with the US titles, it's something you can kind of bounce around a bunch of different teams, and maybe be able to push some people you're trying to develop, or to keep somebody else strong while not making them, the world tag team champions is my guess. That's why I love the belts. I just hated the fact that they would come and go throughout the years. I didn't like that, but the first couple of years I love them. From about here till I'd say about 80, after the Fantastics lose them at the end of 88, they start to lose a little bit of luster, but for the next 2 years I love them.
Of course, eventually Marcus Alexander Bagwell and the Patriot would get their hands on these titles, I think.
Yes, at that point it was, and Greg Valentine and Terry Taylor, and bad.
Yeah, just before we start this, Chad, any thoughts on US Tag Championships? Where do you fall on this one?
I would say they're not in my upper echelon of my favorite belts of all time, but I think when they were pushed appropriately, they did serve a purpose. So I guess I'm probably in the middle of both of you guys.
Any story going into this one? Where have these Memphis guys come from?
Mantell and Jaggers, basically, they came in. They interviewed a few times on television. They actually fought Ivan and Crusher on the September 20th NWA Pro show. One of those TV that didn't have an end. They went to, the show ended. They went off. The actual United States Tag Team Title tournament was held on September 28th, 1986, and big long tournament. And the final of it was actually these two teams again. Ivan and Crusher taking on Dutch Mantell and Bobby Jaggers, and of course the Russians won there. September 11th, or October 11th, they were on television interviewing with the new tag titles and gloating over having that. They showed some highlights of the titles then. From there on, it was, the interviews, I'm going to beat you, you're going to beat me, until about 2 weeks before Starrcade on the November 15th Pro, the Russians did run in and attack the Jayhawks during a squash match to kind of reheat things up for this one here. Set this one up to be no DQ for the United States Tag Team titles. I don't know if you wanted to quickly talk about the U.S. Tag Team title tournament or not. There were some interesting teams in there. Teams like you were talking about how the U.S. tag titles are, in your mind anyway, Parv, not something you could really make an important thing. And then you actually make some sense if you look at the tag teams involved in the tournament final. I mean, we had teams like Tim Horner and Nelson Royal, Dick Murdoch and Ronnie Garvin.
Wow.
Baron von Raschke and Shaska Whatley. Now, this is before Baron's face turn had happened. Bill Dundee and Buddy Landau. I mean, there are some good teams in here as well, but there was a lot of fluff in here to get this up to a 16-team tournament. You will enjoy to know that Dusty and Magnum got themselves all the way to the semifinals of that tournament and couldn't lose. They ended up losing by DQ to the Russians. So, even in a meaningless tag tournament, not even on television, Big Dust has got to get to the semis.
That was a one-shot deal for Dick Murdoch as well, right?
Yeah. I know he'd be back for good a couple more months into 87. He'd start wrestling. At this point, he wasn't around too much here. But yeah, I mean, it looks like a decent tournament. That whole night was actually pretty good. Aside from the tournament, there's another match that we'll talk about in a few minutes here that unified the National and United States Tag Team, or United States Championship.
Given that Mantell and Jaggers are built from coming from Kansas here, I'm guessing they may have been part of the Central States package.
Yes.
Yeah, but I mean, Mantell's known as a Memphis guy mainly, right?
Yeah, oh, yeah, I think of Mantell a lot for Smoky Mountain too, but that's years later.
So obviously it's Ivan Koloff to start, as always. But we get quick tags in and out between Mantell and Jaggers. But we don't get an extended heel in peril segment because Ivan's out. Khrushchev beats on Mantell, who fights back. Mantell's back is so hairy, it looks like somebody stuck some carpet to it. I mean, geez.
Sexy.
This guy's basically a gorilla. Like, he's so hairy.
Somebody loves him.
Ivan comes back in, and there's more double teaming by the faces. Tony mentions that Ivan really needs this win because the Kremlin won't be happy after what's happened with Nikita. More on that later, maybe.
Oh yeah, we'll get to that in a little bit.
I noticed Tony Schiavone's oddly quiet during this match, and there are several quite long silences, which is a little bit strange. Because Rick Stewart's basically a play-by-play guy as well, so they sort of take it in turns. But I noticed there are long periods where Schiavone doesn't say anything. Jaggers gets a hot tag and gets the double noggin knocker, which gets a 2. Ivan gets a chain. Mantell gets Sue Baby, which seems to be a big whip. Ivan gets the worst of it, but Crusher picks up the chain. Ivan Irish whips Jaggers into the chain for the 3. And I've written here, sack this ref. Sandy McGowan just seems to be letting everything go. Was this a non-DQ match, or was it?
It was no DQ.
It was non. Oh right,
yeah.
Okay. They didn't really make a big deal out of that as this match was progressing.
You don't hear a lot about that going in. You figure that might be something they'd want to push along to kind of put some more heat on the match, but they didn't.
Chad, any thoughts on this one?
I think we're 3 for 3 in my opinion, and not getting off to a good start on this show. I thought Dutch Mantell is somebody I've always really liked, but I thought Bobby Jaggers here was pretty much terrible. Ivan was, as we know, well past his prime, and Crusher, I'm not a huge fan of anyway, so this match didn't have a ton going for it. Just, pretty lackluster action, okay finish. I thought the finish was actually probably the best part, with the Shoe Baby and Chain getting involved, but not a whole lot happening for me.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you there, Chad. Brian.
Same thing. I was actually expecting a lot more out of it. I've seen Dutch do some good work. I've seen Bobby Jaggers do some singles work in Southwest Wrestling and places like that. But yeah, I was not a big fan of this match either. It was just kind of there. No, not much. I didn't see a good story told. It was basically, let's beat each other up and then we'll pin you in the end. It was the Russians. I don't know. I think the Russians are another casualty of the Magnum TA accident, because losing Nikita kind of kills them completely as being a super tough group to be feared.
They're starting to feel a bit stale at this point, I think.
Yeah, and I think losing Nikita killed that, because Nikita, as we'll see in a little bit here, had unified the National and United States Championship as well. So Magnum stays healthy. You figure Nikita doesn't turn face. They have the U.S. tag titles and the now unified U.S. National Championship. They're still a threesome and looking dangerous. I still think that they look way better than what happened here. And quickly, within a month and a half of Nikita turning face, the Russians are, spiraling downhill to irrelevance quickly.
They kind of remind me of the Smash Crush version of Demolition,
Yes.
It's kind of faded by this point. So our next match, we got our first look at one of the true legends of wrestling, in my view, Ravishing Rick Rude, who's with Paul Jones, looking pretty fly in a kind of 70s suit. He also looks pretty big, Paul Jones. Like, he's almost built like a square. He's got a very square body. And he's taking on Wahoo McDaniel in an Indian strap match. Rude comes out to Smooth Operator, but we don't get his trademark promo at this point. Wahoo comes out to the Starrcade music, which incidentally is the music that you were trying to hum last week, Brian.
Best music of all time.
So, any story with Rude coming in?
He showed up from World Class. I know he had dropped the World Class Championship to Chris Adams July 4th, 1986. He shows up here immediately as a heel shows up in September on television. October. He debuts on television. He's with Paul Jones from the start. With Wahoo for them to get to this match. Wahoo won the national championship from Tully Blanchard, who, as we left the Great American Bash, still had the national championship. Wahoo beat him for it in Los Angeles on October 28th, 1986, in a match that wasn't televised, which I don't understand why, but it wasn't. Wahoo would end up losing the national title a month later to Nikita Koloff in the unification match we discussed earlier on September 28th. So after that, he was kind of floating around. Rude debuts, and directly after that, Manny Fernandez would turn heel, and Rick Rude and Manny Fernandez would start to be together. You'd see them interviewing, stuff like that. And then finally on October 18th, Wahoo McDaniel came in to interrupt an interview with Manny and Rude, still up to talk to Manny about, hey, why did you turn heel? What's going on here? But Rude and Bull beat him down pretty bad on television. That kind of set up this feud here. And the only other funny thing going into this match was Rick Rude constantly calling him Squahoo McDaniel, leading into this over the last couple of weeks before Starrcade. But I'm not sure why they decided to make it an Indian strap match, other than that was Wahoo's specialty.
But booking-wise, I'm not sure if I would have put Rude with Paul Jones at this point. The Army seemed pretty big anyway at this point. Jones seemed to be managing every other guy on the card. And given what we've talked about Jones before, not a great promo, not great charisma from him, and given what we know about Rude, does he even need a manager? He always seems to have a manager, but does he need one?
No, I definitely don't think he does. He's a good talker. He's always been fantastic on the mic. I don't know why they always stick him with somebody.
There's a loud boo for Rude to start, and a decent pop for Wahoo. When he takes off his robes, when Rude takes off his robes, the girls scream. He does have a nice body, to be honest. Actually, he looks a little bit bigger here than he would a couple of years later in WWF. Like in '87, early '88, Rude is really skinny. I don't know if you can. He has a period where he's really skinny, and then he bulks up for the Warrior feud. But he looks like normal Rick Rude size here. So that interested me. Rude's in control to start off with after the early exchanges, and he touches two corners quickly. But then Wahoo comes back, chokes and whips Rude with the strap, gets three corners. Rude comes back. Hits a knee from the top rope, but then Wahoo regains control and gets three corners again. Jones gets up on the apron. Rude hits Wahoo. What happens here? Jones gets up on the apron. Wahoo's got Rude in three corners, and Rude hits Wahoo into the fourth turnbuckle, and Wahoo gets the win. So this match really was over before it didn't really get going, this match. It was kind of over rather suddenly, in my view. Hector and Baron von Raschke went out to stop a beatdown after the match. Not a lot going on from my point of view. Chad?
This would have been a match that I would have scrapped the Hector von Raschke tag in favor of giving this match a few minutes. I thought a couple little things were interesting here. One is really how much Rude had developed his persona that he would be known for this early into his career. I mean, he's very young here, and he definitely is utilizing most of the Ravishing Rick Rude gimmick already, and there was a few little tweaks before his more, recognizable run in 88, 89, and 90 in the WWF. Rude did some good bumps in this match, and the finish with Wahoo sort of slipping on a banana peel, I thought was actually fine in the way it looked. It was okay. It didn't make Rude look incredibly stupid. It gave Wahoo a win in his specialty match, and for a mid-card match, I thought it was fine, but it did seem like this match was sort of worked in fast-forward style, where, everything was really rushed because they were only given a few minutes for the match. So that was kind of disappointing.
I actually question Wahoo getting the win here. If this was in Vinceland, I think Rude would have been going over. Like, there are plenty of examples of a heel coming in to WWF and then getting a kind of nothing win over a guy like, I don't know, Jimmy Snuka, say, is usually in that spot, or Tito Santana, say. And Wahoo is pretty much the equivalent of a Snuka or a Santana in Crockett, in my view. So, did he need this win? I'm just questioning why put Wahoo over when Rude is the heel coming in.
Oh yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's more so than that Rick Rude was about to win a title too, a week or two after Starrcade, and if you're going to set him up to carry one of the big titles in the company with Manny, you got to give him a win coming out of the gate here at a big show like this. I didn't understand the loss either. I didn't understand the end of the match whenever Manny runs in and they beat on Wahoo. Why Hector Guerrero has to come in to make the save. Kind of makes Rude and Manny look weak and diving out when they should have been able to, if you're going to have them lose to Wahoo, fine, but at least let them, get their heat back by pounding down Wahoo and then pounding down Hector and walking off, at least victorious in that manner if you were going to go where they were going with them a couple weeks later.
This is not a great start to this show, although I was entertained by seeing Rude. He did, like you said, Chad, there were shades of what was to come with him already, which surprised me a little bit because a lot of his kind of 87 stuff isn't that good. Like his early WWF stuff is poor compared to what he shows here. So we're going back to Atlanta now, and it's Bill Dundee versus Sam Houston, who's the Central States champion. Dundee, another Memphis guy. I'm guessing he was also part of the Central States package.
Yep.
Any story going into this, Brian, or is this just a match over a title?
Unless something big was going on in Central States, which I'm not aware of, as I haven't seen a lot of Central States footage. It's kind of hard to get a hold of. Not too much, Sam Houston in September said he was heading to Central States. I know that's when we had talked before about Dusty shipping him off up there. I guess he won the title at some point and was facing Bill Dundee here in just a match to say, hey, here's another company we bought.
Rick Stewart does mention that there's a lot of animosity going back, so there may be some history between these two guys in Central States. He also mentions that fans in St. Louis and Kansas know these two guys well, so this does seem to have been something shipped over from there. It's all Houston to start. Dundee gains control. The ref is on his back about hair pulling quite a lot in this early phase of the match. It goes out to the floor. Houston nails Dundee on the railings. They get back in, and Dundee gets a big right hand from the top rope. We get a snapmare from Dundee, a nasty looking face stretch, some really awesome looking jabs from Dundee now, and then some cocky strutting. And this kind of strutting from Dundee is acceptable to me. He's not dancing, he's just doing cocky strutting, so that's acceptable for me. I was happy at this kind of heel cockiness. We get some vicious choking from Dundee on the bottom rope, and a very feeble "Let's Go Sam" chant from the crowd. And I've noticed they did this in the WTBS studios, watching those matches from there as well. That "Let's Go Sam" chant always sounds really lame. Dundee comes from the top rope again, and we get a front face lock. Houston makes a really fired up comeback with some good punches and a great high knee drop. Houston's actually looking a lot better than he than he was a couple of months ago. He misses a second knee drop and hurts his knee, and Dundee immediately goes to work on the leg. He gets an Indian deathlock. There's a lot of urgency in the way that Dundee works this match. We get a ref bump. Dundee uses a boot on Houston, but the ref actually sees him, and we get an instant DQ, which pisses off Dundee, who hits Houston a few times more with the boot. And I've just written here, how good is Dundee? I pretty much loved this. I thought he was awesome. Chad?
Dundee is great. Dundee is one of, honestly, I think he's a great worker, but for me and what I enjoy in wrestling, he's probably one of my favorite workers of all time. And here, I would guess he was probably maybe booking Central States at this time. I know a lot of times when he would exile from Memphis, him and Lawler were switching bookings and stuff like that. But here I thought, Phil Schneider from Death Valley Driver, one of his talking points is that Dundee is the king of sort of the Memphis studio match and how to work it. And I agree with that, and I think here you saw a glimpse of that, and that he essentially worked I would say a kind of studio match where he mixed in a lot of stick and a lot of interesting spots with great punches, made Houston look well. I was kind of disappointed in the crowd heat because I thought by far this was the best work we've seen so far tonight, but the crowd heat was very bad. And then the finish I thought was fine. It did, again, I don't think it made Dundee look really stupid, as he'd been trying to sort of get these cheap shots throughout the whole match with the hair pulling, and had just barely, he was taking a lot of risk in doing that and trying to elude the referee, and finally this time he got caught.
It's a nice change, actually, for there to be a ref bump and then the guy actually gets caught. That's a nice little story. I enjoyed it. And I haven't seen a whole lot of Bill Dundee, but on this kind of evidence, he looks absolutely awesome to me. He worked with a lot of urgency and a lot of kind of viciousness in everything he did, and he just made it seem like he really wanted to win this match and hurt Houston. And he did a lot of the kind of nice little heel spots as well. I enjoyed it. Brian?
Yeah, he's great at that, at using his size. I mean, he's an undersized person, a small person, and in all his matches, his high-end Memphis matches, and all of his high-end matches, he's really great at sort of working that intense size style where he sort of has to overcome that with other attributes.
Yeah, I agree completely. I'd like to. This match actually made me want to go find some Central States TV just to see where they went after this, and if they had any other their good stuff on television. So I love Bill Dundee too. I love his Memphis work. I mean, Bill Dundee will always for me be associated with Jerry Lawler.
Yeah.
But up here, this was good, and I wanted to see more.
And does he stick around, or is this just a kind of limited time sort of deal?
He was around for a while with Buddy Landell earlier in the year. They had come and gone, and then they from here, I'm pretty sure they go back to Memphis. Bill Dundee goes back down to Memphis and works down there for a little bit, and not sure exactly where he goes after that, but I know he's not here much longer in Crockett Land.
So yeah, easily the match of the night so far. We go from this to part 362 of Jimmy Valiant versus Paul Jones in another hair versus hair match, with two added stipulations. One is that Big Mama's hair is the one that will be cut if Valiant loses, and the other is that Manny Fernandez has to be locked in a cage above the ring. So, Brian, how do we get to this point?
Yeah, it was an interesting ride to get here. I have a comment on this after I'm done, but basically after the Bash match, or the Great American Bash matches, Paul Jones spent a couple weeks gloating over shaving Jimmy Valiant and continued to still want to take Jimmy Valiant out for good. He begins to woo Manny Fernandez by offering him lots of money to come join the Army. Manny, between August 9th and early September, continues to say he won't turn heel. He's with the bull. But you can kind of see in the interviews and stuff, Manny looking at the money a little more, starting to think that maybe I do want to do this. And then finally, on the October 11th worldwide, they do show that Manny finally did turn heel on Jimmy Valiant. Yet another friend beating down poor Jimmy and leaving him. On the same show, Jimmy Valiant finally has had enough, and he says in an interview that he will put up anything for one more shot at Paul Jones in the ring. So, of course, that they go with Big Mama's hair against Paul Jones' hair, and the added stipulation is that Manny, his former friend, is put up in a cage to get us into this one. A couple of things I wanted to add was, first off, even if you win this match, Jimmy, you lost. He's taken all your friends. He shaved your head. He's done all this to you, and all you did was shaved his head in the end. Big deal. And really, you really got your ass kicked for 2.5 years over here, just everything taken away from you. So I don't know why you'd want his hair. I think you'd probably want to kill him at this point. And the only other thing is, I thought, why not do a kind of a handicap match with Paul Jones as a manager? Wouldn't be do Rude, Manny, and Paul Jones against Jimmy Valiant and Wahoo. Jimmy's hair or Big Mama's hair versus Paul Jones' hair, doing a no DQ match. You can still have the same ending with Jones finally getting his head shaved. But I just thought it would work these angles in a little bit better than what we got.
The commentators do mention that, well, Coddle mentions that Valiant's been depressed.
Yeah, I mean, how could you not be? My God.
Sorry, I don't know what that explains me.
He's taking his will to live at this point.
Anyway, the crowd is still wild for Jimmy Valiant here, who's still shucking and jiving away. Manny Fernandez is very reluctant to get in the cage, and in pretty much his only notable comment for the entire night, Weaver calls the cage Betty Lou. Is that some expression that I've never heard of? What's the deal there?
I believe that's the same cage that Dusty Rhodes brought in to give to the Rock and Roll Express when they were feuding with the Midnight Express to jam Jim Cornette in because he was interfering in their matches. And I believe that's what Dusty had called it, Betty Lou, then as well. Yeah, it makes no sense. But I hate that cage thing. Before you get there, you're going into this cage. Obviously, you've agreed to it because it's in a contract. What's the deal? Get in. That's one of the things that's always bothered me about 1980s wrestling in that little cage is that we have to spend the 5-10 minutes on not getting in and being shoved in. It's dude, you said you were going to get in, shut up.
9 times out of 10, it's the manager or the valet who's in that cage.
Right.
So this just shows how this whole thing is ass backwards here, with the wrestler getting in the cage and the manager working the match. But for some reason, there's a need to see more Paul Jones wrestling at this point. I mean, how many years has he been retired here? 2 now?
Well, he's wrestled, is this the 3rd or 4th time on a big show these two have wrestled with him as a manager? Jeez.
Anyway, the Baron and Wahoo and Hector all come out to put him in the cage. And he goes in the cage. There's a shine sequence from Valiant to start off with, until Jones nails him with the dreaded foreign object in the tights. But he misses a knee drop, uses the object again, goes for an Indian deathlock, but Valiant, bloodied, fired up, and basically spazzing out, gets a sleeper on. Then gets hold of the foreign object, and I couldn't actually tell what it was. It was some little white object, and he gets the 3. So finally, we get a match which is at least worked like you'd expect a manager versus wrestler match to work, where Jones gets very little offense in, and what he's able to get in isn't that effective. Crowd is absolutely electric here because Jones is going to get his head shaved. Valiant doesn't even sit up Jones; he actually shaves him while he's lying down. Manny Fernandez somehow gets out of the cage and hits the ring. Rude hits the ring. They both beat down Valiant, and it's a pretty brutal beatdown of Valiant. The Baron and Wahoo back out, but Valiant is out cold, and he looks legit dead.
Yeah, what did you win in this feud? Sir, what did Jimmy Valiant win in this feud?
Wahoo sits him up, and but Valiant is pretty much just out of it. Now, Chad, given that this is your favorite guy, tell us what you think.
I mean, I thought that the match. I agree with Brian that it is silly when the manager or whoever's going in the cage always acts like they had no idea what was going on. Unfortunately, it does get a big pop here when Manny finally got, I guess, tricked into getting into the little cage. It got a pretty big pop. The work here was, not great, but I thought it was fine. I think Jimmy's definitely looking older at this time. He's definitely looking on the way down. And to me, this match should have been, the final hoorah for him. He should have beat Paul Jones in essentially the same fashion he did. He should have shaved the head. We could have had a little thing where Manny tries to save him and Jimmy clears house, and then, he shaves Paul's head, sort of parades around with his hair. I'm kind of picturing like a Roddy Piper, Adrian Adonis WrestleMania 3 type scene.
Yeah.
Where, he parades around with his hair, goes to the back, and then that's pretty much it of Jimmy as far as being in any angle of consequence or any big time angle. He can work some comedy matches or some undercard stuff, but this would have been it. I thought it was absolutely asinine for him to get beat up at the end of the match, because again, there's no more stakes, no higher stakes you can have besides this. People have gotten their heads shaved. This feud's been way drawn out now, so they should just gave Jimmy his last shining moment and been done with it. So that was probably the most frustrating thing to me overall in this show, besides one more event that I'll talk about later.
Would you guys agree that where Crockett is where Crockett as a territory was generally decent at booking heels, when it came to booking baby faces and blow-offs and things, they just didn't really know what they were doing? Because the end of this, ideally, okay, you have a scene where Paul Jones wakes up and he looks befuddled, and he's standing in the ring on his own, and he doesn't know what's going on, and he looks in the mirror, and he sees, where was that scene?
Exactly.
But we didn't even get to see really Jones wake up, or there was no kind of payoff here. Very strange. Very strange.
I think part of that, what you're talking about, may, in the rare occasions where the baby face did get the perfect kind of blow-off finish, for instance, the Magnum Tully Starrcade 85, I Quit match, that sort of makes that, stand out even more fondly. I mean, that was a great finish, but in the context of everything else we've seen, that just, is magnified.
Yeah, well said. I always wonder, too, if, Paul Jones is sitting at home sometimes and just inadvertently cuts a Jimmy Valiant promo after doing it for so many years.
No, but, I'm just thinking, this should have been a much bigger deal than, for example, okay, just off the top of my head, Brutus Beefcake when he just cuts a little bit of Jimmy Hart's hair. Doesn't even shave his head, he just cuts a little bit of his ponytail off. And that was just a massive deal. Jimmy Hart sold it it was the biggest, the worst thing ever. Crowd was going wild. Why couldn't we have had a moment like that? Seems odd. Now, and this is coming from a heel fan. I hate it when the baby faces get their big payoff, but kind of seeing things work this way where they don't happen, structurally it needs to happen, I think. It's almost like the full stop that you need, the period. Yeah. So, Brian, does this feud actually continue from here, or is this it now for these guys?
Paul Jones transitions to his tag team, becomes the focus of him, but throughout early '87, they're still mouthing off at each other, and then Jimmy Valiant starts calling Paul Jones a bald-headed geek. And Paul Jones wears a hat the whole time, so you never really see him bald, and they're still mouthing off to each other back and forth. But this is it in terms of, big showdowns. But I swear to God, they hate each other today. But I'm really surprised they don't have like WWE doesn't have a throwback night and have Valiant and Paul Jones headline it. It just bothers me. This went on way too long, and like I said, Jimmy Valiant got nothing in the end of this.
Right, and how long does he hang around for now, Valiant?
I know he's in the Crockett Cup in April. He's a little bit out. I want to say mid-'87. He's maybe towards the fall, and then he's gone.
Right. So
finally.
Still some time for him.
Yes, so. nothing really of... He might have a little bit of television time, so a couple interviews, some shucking and jiving, stuff like that, but he's never really featured in any big role, I don't think, again after this.
Chad, we're going to have to give him a big send-off. Maybe we'll do a 5-minute retrospective where you can tell us all about your favorite Jimmy Valiant memories.
Fans, for all of us here at WCW Center Stage, for Cowboy Bill Watts and the American Dream Dusty Rhodes, I'm Jim Ross saying good night, everybody.